I am going to be talking about this feature right here, which is Blood Falls, but I'm going to set it up by talking about Antarctica and subglacial environments and what we know about them and why they're so intriguing to a lot of polar scientists and oceanographers presently. So let's see, how does this work? Okay, I'm going to talk about our Blood Falls work at the end. We have a paper that Chris is about ready to submit. We've been working on it only for about 18 months. But it's about ready to go in, and my collaborators are Jill McCookie, who's a microbiologist at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Aaron Pettit and Slavic, Aaron at University of Alaska Fairbanks, Slavic at Santa Cruz. They're both glaciologists, so this was a multidisciplinary project. But we've had a whole bunch of collaborators, including our German colleagues who've developed a technology to sample the subglacial environment, which I'll show you in a moment. And these folks listed next are kind of like, I'm Tom Sawyer and they're the guy that painted the fence. So I said, gee, we have these nice samples. It would be great to get some really outrageous isotopic measurements that we can't do here. So Avner and Pete and Andrew and Steve and others actually, this group is the University of Waterloo Hydro Group. We've run every isotope known to humans just about on these samples. My long-term collaborators are John Priskew and Mark Skidmore, who aren't involved in the Blood Falls project, but are involved in the projects prior to that we did on Lake Vostok and also on some future work that's been funded. And Martin Tranter and Gemma Wadham at the University of Bristol have been involved with us right from the beginning as well. And then there's the people that do the work over on the bottom on the right. And I want to particularly thank Laura Gurman, who helped collect these samples, Anthony Lutton, who works with John, who helped her analyze the trace element data, which I'm not going to talk about today. I don't have the time. But Kathy and Sue and Elsa and Chris in my group have been really instrumental, not just in this project, but all the projects we do, and I owe them a great debt of thanks. So let's talk about subglacial environments. In Antarctica, I'm going to mainly talk about Antarctica, but is Ian here? Ian Howard has done some really interesting work recently on these same types of systems in Greenland. So I'm going to limit my discussions to Antarctica. They were discovered using radar measurements in 1973. It made a big splash, and then everybody forgot about them for 23 years. Okay, I'm serious. Until the cover of Nature, which I'll show you in a moment, there was in 1996, spurred an international group supported by SCAR, the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research, formed a group called SAIL. Everybody has to have an acronym. This, like in Antarctica, this kind of research has acronyms out the wazoo. I'll try not to overuse them. So SCAR formed SAIL in 1999, and I was one of the founding members of the SAIL group. So from 1999 to 2014, Martin Siegert, a glaciologist now at the University of London, was the leader of SAIL for a number of years. We went from Lake Vostok, one lake, to 380 lakes underneath Antarctica as of 2014, and there are probably more than that now. They're probably, I'll talk about the size and scale of them in a moment. This was in 2015. I was honored enough. I was honored to be involved with this group who was charged by the Royal Society to sponsor a Theo Murphy meeting, 60 scientists, 15 nations in this beautiful old estate out in the middle of nowhere in Britain. It was a great week meeting to talk about what we knew about subglacial lakes in Antarctica. And this was right after the WIZARD, another acronym, and program, and others, and there were the Brits that were there who weren't successful into drilling into Lake Ellsworth, the Russians who weren't successful in drilling into Lake Vostok, and the Americans who were successful into drilling into the Whillans, underneath the Whillans ice stream. And I'm not really going to talk about those works, but if you want to, that volume has been published in January of 2016 in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, and the whole volume's on this meeting. So this is what spurred the research. So this was the cover of Nature in '96, and there's Lake Vostok. Lake Vostok, the size of Lake Ontario, if you can believe that, in the middle of the Antarctic ice sheet. And the idea, the Russians and the French, working with the French, the idea was to drill through the ice sheet into this frozen lake ice, and Apollo was intimately involved in this program. And the idea was first to analyze this frozen on lake water and see what it looked like, with the ultimate goal to drill into the lake itself. And the idea behind this was, in part, is there life there, right? Is there life there? If we assume that this ice sheet, the East Antarctic ice sheet in this location, has been in that location for 20, maybe 14, 20 million years, what does the life look like? And the reason people thought there might be life there is because if you look at Antarctic glaciers and lakes and sea ice, it has a lot of organic matter in it. So the idea was that there's organic matter raining down from the top as the ice melts into the lake, but also there might be organic matter in the bed as well that was there when before the ice sheet was actually formed. And so the idea is there probably, or there could be enough organic matter to generate some sort of microbial life over time. And that's certainly what they've seen in the Whillans work, the wizard work. So I was lucky enough to be a friend of John Priskew, and he was smart enough to ask Julie Palais, who is the NSF Director of Glaciology, if we could have a piece of this ice that Palos and the French and the Russians had drilled into that was frozen on lake water. Okay, and the reason we got access to it is because that was part of the deal. The U.S. provided logistics to get these people in and out. We should have access to some of the ice. And so we wrote a proposal with Brent Christner, who did his PhD with Lonnie and Ellen here at Ohio State, who's now at University of Florida. I was then there 3 weeks ago. We're working on a project together. And here's Martin Tranter again, and then Kathy and I. So we were analyzing this frozen on lake water for its chemistry, and John's group was doing the microbiology. Dave Carl, who's an oceanographer at the University of Hawaii, National Academy member, also had written a proposal asking for a piece of this ice, and he analyzed it independently of us. So we have this Christner paper, we have a Priskew paper where they cultured viable microbes from this ice. And of course, the big issue here is not to contaminate it, right? You want to make sure that the bugs that you see in there were actually bugs that were there, not what the drilling fluid put in or handling. And so the Russians had a contradictory finding. They found bugs, but they said it's got to be contamination initially. And I think now they think there may be some sort of, there's been speculation there's a geothermal system down there. We published a paper a year and a half ago looking at the strontium isotopes of this frozen on water. There's no way it's a geothermal system. It looks, the strontium isotopic composition was radiogenic. It's old crust, just like if you at least listen to Ian Dalzell, he would tell you that it's old crust. So, but this debate still rages whether there's life in these really, really old lakes. And so I'll leave you there. That's the Vostok story in a nutshell. So our group was in on the ground floor of looking at these systems. So this is a Siegert paper. I should have a reference on there. So these are the lakes. This was from the 2012 paper. So this isn't the 380 that came out in 2014. This is still an underestimate of what was there. But all those little dots represent what are thought to be lakes underneath the Antarctic ice sheet. And again, I point out there's Vostok, which is the biggest one. Okay? And the idea behind this was, is there a relationship? And this is why this is more than a biological problem now, more than a chemical problem. It's a glaciological problem. Is there a relationship between these lakes and these streams and rivers I'm going to show you in a moment and the dynamics of the ice sheet? Can we tie the dynamics of the ice sheet somehow into what's going on in the subsurface? And that's what Ian's trying to do in Greenland. Okay? So as of, this is probably a little bit earlier. So as of so this is Siegert 2005. There were only 145, so now we're up to 380, okay? So this is a little out of sequence, I apologize. There's the size of Vostok. Vostok is huge. This is the 220 meters of frozen lake ice at the bottom that we analyzed some of, the French and the Russians are still analyzing. But most of these lakes occur in clusters, as you saw in East Antarctica, but Lake Ellsworth in West Antarctica, that was the target of the British program 4 years ago. So this is another paper by Siegert, and again, these colors represent sizes, which I'll show you in a moment to get a feel. So this was Siegert, again, this is Vostok for reference. Well, notice you're starting to see them now underneath these ice streams, right? That's important if you're a glaciologist. So we're seeing them in the middle of the East Antarctic ice sheet, but we're starting to see them in these ice streams also draining the interior. So here is from the same paper, and I just want to point out that this is the estimated volumes of these lakes in kilometers cubed, and this is the percentage. So we're seeing they're able to image by radar very, very smaller and smaller lakes. And so you kind of get a feel for the distribution, just like you would on Earth. The large lakes aren't a very high percentage of the total. They're relatively small, both in area and also in depth, which I'll come back to in a moment. So this is the most recent paper trying to delineate. And these are related to something I'm going to talk about later. You see fill and drain. All of a sudden, we don't have lake systems now. We have hydrologic systems underneath the ice sheet. Okay? So this is my summary. This is why I'm interested in the topic, because I think that these lakes probably have different chemistries based on what we know about lakes on the surface, and that chemistry is dependent on, is it Pleistocene ice or is it Holocene ice? The chemistry is very different, as Lonnie and Ellen and Paula will tell you. The age, what the underlying lithology is, what the tectonic activity is. $24 question to most lay people anyway. What's the biology? What does it look like? How does the ecosystem work? Do we have flow-through lakes, or are these closed basin lakes? Okay? And is there groundwater? Is there some sort of groundwater system underneath the surface of the geology? And so I claim there could be varying chemistries. And of course, if you're looking for life elsewhere in the solar system, these systems have been related to these moons of some of the larger planets in the solar system. In fact, I think that's the next picture. So this is Enceladus. Our German colleagues are funded by the European Space Agency to develop technology so they can land on this ice surface and penetrate into this subsurface, collect samples, figure out what the chemistry is, and find out if there's any life there. So we got hooked up with some German engineers working as astrobiologists, essentially, to work on blood falls, which I'm getting a little ahead of. Okay. So I've talked about the lakes. Let's talk about, gee, some of these lakes are connected. How do we know that? Well, this is a kind of a cartoon from Siegert, and so he wasn't the first, but he certainly has done a lot of work. I think the first was Helen Fricker at Scripps. I'll show you some of her work in a moment. So we've got this down slope, and so maybe there's a lake up here, there's subsurface melt. That melt would flow down slope, maybe stop into another lake. There might be a quiet period, flow down. And so we essentially have a lake system with streams, maybe wetlands, maybe groundwater in this system. Really, really exciting stuff, I think. So this is from Helen and Ted Scambos's work. And this is Mercer ice stream here, where we'll be sampling next year. And this is the Willans ice stream where they sampled 3 or 4 years ago. And so this is the topography. And this is a lake here, and they've put in the arrows. I'll show you a more detailed picture with data here in a moment. But so we have essentially a hydrologic system under these ice streams, at least where people have looked in detail. Okay, here's the picture from Matt Sigrid's work. He is a postdoc with Helen Fricker at Scripps. This was published in GRL last year. So here's the same general area. So this is the Mercer ice stream. Okay, this is the Willans ice stream. This represents a river or a flow path. Lake here. Here's another flow path. Lake here, lake here, lake here. Flow path, flow path. How do we know that? Well, they were first doing this from space, but Helen's group has GPSs out there sitting, and they're watching the ice sheet go up and down. And it's going up and down on the order of anywhere from 1 to 5 meters. And so what's happening here, so this is this lake. This lake is filling, and then it's losing water, and then it's filling, and then it's losing water. And you can see what's going on downstream. As this lake loses water, this lake gains water. And so we're seeing this interconnection of the hydrology, both by altimetry, satellite altimetry, which I think is what Ian's, is Ian using GPS or altimetry? I forget, in Greenland. But these, and so we're going to be out next year sampling in, I think it's in this lake right here, on the Mercer ice stream. So the point being, and I'm probably belaboring it, is this is a dynamic system underneath the ice sheets. And we have water flowing, it's ponding, it's flowing, and depending on what the subsurface geology is, like I said, there may be a groundwater system as well. How exciting is that? And here's NSF's version of what the system looks like. It's a cartoon, but I think it's a pretty appropriate one. Whoops, sorry. So we've lifted the ice sheet off the continent, and here are the lakes, and here are these river systems and streams. And again, these aren't all the lakes. There's Vostok, which started it all. And so we've got this subsurface hydrology. Again, clearly I'm interested in the chemistry, Priscu and Christner and others, Skidmore, interested in biology, but if you're a glaciologist, you are interested in this too, because you're interested in the dynamics of the ice sheet and how this, if any, affects it. Okay, so I like this one the best. This guy's a glacial modeler. He's from Belgium, University of Leuven, and he's looked at the water fluxes based on the basal melt rates. I think Slavic has done something like this as well. And you can see that he's predicting large volume flows from the interior parts of Antarctica out underneath the ice shelves. Okay? So a flux of, considerable flux of water out into the ocean, which brings me to another point. If you're an oceanographer, now you have to be interested in this as well, because this could be a source of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, iron into the Southern Ocean, which hadn't been accounted for up until, even thought about up until a decade ago. And this is from a paper that I was a co-author on, that Gemma was the lead, where we sat and did some calculations, and we calculated that the solute flux, based on what little data we had from the subsurface, which wasn't very much, is about this much per year from the Antarctic, and that's comparable to the Amazon, essentially. So if you believe this, the subglacial flow from Antarctica is putting in as much salt into the ocean as the Amazon River is, and we can calculate the area, and so we can look at the chemical weathering yield, and it's about 24 tons per kilometer squared per year, and that's about what the average global weathering rate is. Okay? So we have a weathering rate underneath the ice sheet that's comparable to what we see on the land surface, average. So the other, gee, I don't have, so this is the Antarctic Peninsula here. So I'm over in West Antarctica. This is a paper that my colleague Reed Corbett at East Carolina University, and our group was involved. We're co-authors on this paper. And basically what he's looking at is radium-224, which is produced from the decay of thorium-234 is the last long-lived isotope. And thorium is very particle reactive. It doesn't go into solution very well. But its great progeny, radium-224, is soluble. And so notice these hot spots along the edges of the continent. These are our data for oxygen isotopes. This is, deuterium. And you can see that the lighter isotopes are hugging the continent as well. And this would be from the ice mixing with seawater. And we think that this is a good suggestion that this subsurface flow is coming out of underneath the glaciers into the Southern Ocean here along the coastline in West Antarctica. So I think, for reference, again, I should have put this on here. I think Palmer Station is right in here somewhere. Okay, so there's some evidence from geochemical evidence that suggests there's outflow underneath. And of course, again, this opens the line of inquiry how important this is for fertilizing the Southern Ocean. And as the ice sheet continues to melt, will that fertilization pulse increase and have some effect on pulling down the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? The other consequences, this is crazy, right? This is work Adam Lewis, who was a Bird Fellow, did. But this is the Dias. Who's been there besides Anne Grunow and David? Oh, I'm sorry, David. Okay, so I'm standing on the East Antarctic ice sheet. I'm standing on the East Antarctic ice sheet. VXE6 icefall is coming down, and this is the western part of Wright Valley. This is Lake Vanda for those of you who. So this is Lake Vanda. The ocean's out here. You can't see Mount Erebus in the background. And Adam and others have argued that this is scour. It looks like the Scablands, right? It looks like eastern Washington and Oregon, the Scablands. They've argued that this is an outburst, subglacial outburst flood. And so not only could this discharge from underneath the glaciers have importance from a geochemical and an oceanographic point of view, it could be helping to carve the landscape of Antarctica as well. And this, I stole this from Slavic. He's wise in his young years. In 2006, there was a SAIL meeting in, where was it, Anne? It was in Grenoble? Annecy. And Slavik got up and he postulated at the time that, not only are there lakes, but there are rivers, there are wetlands, and there's groundwater. And he speculated, again, that the chemistry would be affected depending on what hydrologic feature you were sampling. So he was kind of visionary thinking about this. Okay, that was my introduction. You guys are excited, right? This is really cool. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about blood falls. Okay, and I'm not going to show very much data, so I didn't put very much chemistry in here. So here's McMurdro Station, Ross Island. So this is Mount Erebus. So here's Wright Valley. Okay, the picture I just showed you of the dais is about right here on this map. Okay, so this is the Taylor Glacier, right here, and the Farrar Glacier. These are the easternmost extent of the East Antarctic ice sheet. Okay, so the Taylor Glacier is flowing into Taylor Valley. Griffith Taylor, humble man that he was, named both the glacier and the valley after himself in 1912, sorry. So here's Taylor Valley. We're, as the LTR group, we've worked here for 25 years. But so at the snout of the Taylor Glacier is this red discharge called Blood Falls. It's hypersaline. It's very, very salty, about the salinity of, is it 10 times seawater, Sue? 8 times seawater. And it's red because there's a lot of iron in it. When that water discharges out onto the surface of the lake, this is a lake here, this is Lake Bonny, it oxidizes from iron 2 to iron 3. And so I use the word we loosely. This is Jill McCookie is the brainchild of this project. She's the one that really did all the heavy lifting and the legwork to get it funded. As usual, I'm just hanging out with the right people. So here's a map view. Here's the ocean out here, and here's Taylor Glacier, the west lobe of Lake Bonny, east lobe of Lake Bonny, and the Blood Falls sits right here. Okay, so we wanted to drill into the lake. We wanted to drill into the source of this discharge without contaminating the glacier. And we thought about this in many, many ways, and that's how, and because of Jill, we hooked up with our German colleagues. Wait a minute, here's a better picture. So this is the moraine, you got it, right? Here's the moraine. This is Taylor Glacier's coming this way. The Alpine Glacier's coming down from the, Kukri Hills here. And this is a stream entering, but this is the discharge. And so this brine, hypersaline brine, with high concentrations of iron, is making its way through the glacier. And Aaron Pettit's group has just shown that it's this in-glacial brine through cracks and crevices is coming up and discharging onto the surface. And this was, again, NSF, really good cartoonist, kind of putting the cartoon together of how we think this happens. We had known from some geophysical work actually done by some Kiwi scientists that this brine pool goes back maybe another about another, I think it's 3 kilometers back this way. But somehow this hypersaline water is making it through the glacier, spilling out here, and this is Lake Bonny. So what we wanted to do was drill in through here and sample some of this brine, which is what we did. So we hooked up with these guys, Bernd from Occam, and they have a device I'll show you in a moment called IceMole. So we were MIDGE, remember the acronyms now. We were MIDGE, and they were ice mole. So ice mole and MIDGE got married and developed this project where the Germans provide all the technology and we did all the science. It was great because we didn't have to give them any money. They already were funded through the European Space Agency. So this is what ice mole looks like. So this is the front end of ice mole. These are melters. Okay, so this melts down through the ice, and this is this proboscis is associated with tubing that we can draw the melted water up through the instrument, through the tubing, back and collect it. And that's what we did. I use the word we loosely. I wasn't there. Okay. Again, Laura was there, my student, okay, who many of you know. So that's what the ice mole looks like. This is the cartoon from the Germans on the way it's supposed to work, where they can guide it, they can direct it from the top, they can move it, and it melts through it, depending on the density of the ice, maybe an hour, a meter or so. Okay, so it's not you're not going to drill at the South Pole with this thing, right? Because you'd be there. Your grandchildren would have to finish up the drilling. But in shallow ice, this works fairly well. So again, another cartoon, and again, this is being developed to go to Europa and Enceladus. Okay, that's what they're funded to do. So this was a great marriage because they could test it in real life ice ways and also provide us with samples. So like I said, it was a great marriage. And so we had a bunch of their engineers down sampling. So the Enceladus Explorer, ice mole met MIDGE, minimally invasive direct. I want to say right now, I have nothing to do with these acronyms. Priscu and McCookie just tell me what they are, and I go along with it. Okay, so this is minimum invasive direct glacial exploration of biogeochemistry, hydrology, and glaciology of blood falls, MIDGE. Okay, so our questions were, what are the constraints on the hydrology? What's the origin of the brine? That was our part of the deal. We looked at the chemistry, and Jill and others interested in the biology of the system. So so I'm standing on Taylor Glacier now, and you're looking at this discharge coming out, this hypersaline iron-rich discharge, and there are periods of time where there's no discharge, and there's periods of time when there's high discharge events. And because of Kathy Welsh, we have, and the LTR, we have samples of blood falls over about a 25-year period, and we know that there are times when it's really, really salty, when there's discharge, and when there's very little salt coming out of the system, where it's essentially melted glacier. Okay, so we know that this is kind of a pulsing event of this discharge from this brine. And the next two slides are from Jill. I just wanted to show you that, yes, indeed, there are organisms living in this hypersaline, iron-rich brine. In fact, Jill published a paper in Science in 2009. This is from that work, where she's taken an auger plate, she's reached into the brine, taken a sterile glass rod, and she's growing bacteria, basically, from the brine. And again, I'm not going to go into this because it's not my area of expertise anyway, but these are the types of organisms. So they've done 16S analysis. They've looked at the genomes of these organisms that they've collected and cultured, and there's a whole suite of organisms that are, some of them virtually unknown. Some of them related to things that are known, but some of them never seen before. So the brave new world of what kinds of organisms are living under these ice sheets is really kind of interesting if you're an ecologist or an evolutionary biologist. So here's Laura and Jill. We set up a clean lab, as clean as we could do it, on the Taylor Glacier. And we collected samples both sterilely, because Jill needed sterile samples, and we needed clean samples to do the geochemistry on. So it was a huge endeavor. But you can see we analyzed for everything we could think of. And so I just wanted to show you this. It was a lot of effort to do this, beyond the engineering, just the collection of the samples. Bless you, Ann. So I'm going to just show you a few chemistry slides. Some of you have seen these before. So here's the brine. So here's the brine. I guess that's only about 5 times seawater. Okay, 5 times seawater. Bunch of iron in it. It's got carbon in it. The water looks like the ice. It doesn't look like ocean water. It looks like melted ice. It's got nitrate and ammonia in it. It's got phosphate in it. It's got silica in it. Unlike the lakes, it has no perchlorate. This is Wizard. This is the Whillans sample under the Whillans ice stream from Christner and a recent paper by another one of John's students, Priskey's students. Notice it's fresh water, not a surprise that these are the systems that are pulsing, sending water down slope. So the chemistry is really, really different, but it also has carbon in it. These samples had methane in them as well, by the way. Again, the water isotopically looks like the ice, not surprisingly. It's got nitrogen in it, it's got phosphorus in it, it's got silica in it. So the take-home message is, I think, threefold. We only have 2 samples. Really. The chemistries are really different. One's fresh, one's salty. The water looks like melted glacier, but there's carbon and nutrients in them. Okay, there's carbon and nutrients in them, and there is, there is weathering product in them. High silica in both samples, and we've analyzed, like I said, the uranium and the strontium isotopes, and they definitely look like, they don't look like seawater. They look like weathered crust. And so we know that this water is picking up weathering product as well as salt and nutrients. So in our paper that we're about ready to submit, we've looked at what we think the only 3 possibilities of the source of this brine is, and we've drawn a conclusion. We think it's modified, in this case, modified ancient seawater, and we can talk about that at the end if you're interested. I just wanted to show you, I said only a little bit of data. One of the interesting things about this brine, so this is a plot of sulfate versus chloride, calcium versus sodium, and so here's seawater, okay, for reference. So in this, these guys are blood falls, all those blood falls data I showed you. Here's our MIDGE brine. This is the west lobe of Lake Bonny. And notice that in regard to seawater, it's depleted in both sodium and sulfate and sodium. And we think that somewhere underneath that glacier, we've precipitated the salt mirabolite, sodium to sulfate. It precipitates at about -8 degrees in concentrated brine, and the bottoms of this glacier is about -9 degrees. So we're getting separation of the chemistry by some sort of cryogenic concentration. So we think we've lost mirabolite, and if you go along the dry valleys, there's mirabolite salts everywhere in the dry valleys sitting around. So there's chemistry going on underneath the glacier as well. The other thing of interest, and I tried to find Peter Dorn, our colleague's data, is it looks like that, and Peter has data to suggest this. So the west lobe of Lake Bonny is the lake that's abutting the glacier, right? And so here's the brine, here's blood falls, here's seawater, and we think that there's probably some discharge, and Peter, like I said, has evidence of this brine into the lake underneath the glacier as well. So we're getting discharge up through this crack, this conduit, out as blood falls, and there may be some loss of salinity, right? Because it's a little bit different chemistry, but we're seeing this input of subglacial brine at about 15, 16, 17 meters in the lake. So it's a much more dynamic system, glacier brine lake, than we would have envisioned up prior to 2 or 3 years ago. I'm almost done. Last bit of chemistry is, here's some recent work that Sydney Olun, one of my students, did on the stream. So we're interested in iron input into the Southern Ocean. And what happens if you melt glaciers and increase more ice-free area? How much iron might that input into the coastal part of the Southern Ocean? Why are we interested in that? We know that iron is the micronutrient that's the most limiting to phytoplankton growth in the Southern Ocean. So any impulse, there's a lot of nitrogen, there's a lot of phosphorus, but there's not much productivity. And the reason we think that is because of the lack of iron. And so here's her work for reference. Here's what the stoichiometry of the phytoplankton are. And this is the brine, okay? A lot of iron, right? A lot of silica, a lot of phosphorus relative to nitrogen. And so the whole point of this is if this brine were to leak into the ocean, it could help drive productivity. And even on a larger scale, perhaps these types of subglacial brines exist along the length of Victoria Land. And this is not a one horse pony, no, you know what I mean. Okay, and so there's a potential, again, of input of a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and particularly iron into the system. So we're interested, from an oceanographic point of view. And if that wasn't enough, this is mind-boggling. This is Jill's paper in Nature Communications, 2016, guys, or 2015? Not that it mattered. 2015, and they flew with their they have some Danish colleagues, and this was amazing to see. It's a helicopter with a gigantic hula hoop around it. I wouldn't have gotten close to the damn helicopter myself. And they're flying resistivity geophysical data up and down the dry valleys. They just got funded to go back and do more of this. And what they've shown is, so here's blood falls, right? And the blues are very little resistivity, which means that they're salty water. So here's blood falls, here's the brine underneath Taylor Glacier. But look, it's underneath the middle of the valley, it's underneath the eastern part of the valley, and it looks like it's connected to the ocean down here. So this is brine underneath the permafrost, which is what has been observed in Siberia and other places recently as well. And so there may be huge brine, and that's what this cartoon's represented, huge brine pools, and what connection there is to the ocean and what connection they have with the lakes and other things, the surface hydrologic system, we don't know. And again, this is the cartoon of where these brine pools are. Yeah, it's 2015 in Nature paper. So, many unanswered questions, right? At least, I'm just talking about Taylor Valley now, let alone all of Antarctica. So the sub-Taylor Glacier brine, is it hydrology? Is it connected to these other brines that have been observed? When was the initial seawater that forms the brine introduced into Taylor Valley? Interesting question, both from a tectonics, I think, and a hydrologic point of view, climate point of view. Are there similar subsurface systems along all the parts of Victoria Land when sea level was higher, or the glaciers were pushing down the transantarctics? And how are the brines related to the climate history of the dry valleys? I think those are really 4 very interesting questions. So what's next? Again, I'm hanging out with, again, this is Priscu. I had nothing to do with this, okay? So I'm hanging out with the right people. Apollo's former PhD advisors involved in this project too. We're going to go to the Mercer ice stream, and we're going to collect water and pore fluids in this coming field season. And our group's going to do a lot of isotope and gas work, okay? So SALSA, integrated study of carbon cycling in hydrologically active subglacial environments. And then we have a proposal pending with some of my LTR colleagues to sample some of this Taylor Glacier brine by drilling through the Canada Glacier. So we're going to try to sample, we're going to do like we did with the MIDGE, except we're going to drill through the ice sheet into the subsurface and collect the brine and see if the chemistry looks like the chemistry of Bullet Falls or if it's different. So that's kind of where we are. So again, I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks for coming. It was fun putting this together. It's the first time I've attempted to do it. I want to thank Chris for helping me do it crazily yesterday afternoon. But I also want to thank everybody. There's a couple of you in the room that have been really instrumental and right from the beginning, starting with Lake Vostok ice, that have been involved with our group. So thanks, everybody. How'd I do it?